In this video, I'm going to be giving you a little bit of information that I've been able to gather up on this. Something that was brought up in the details on a base camp video. I think it was Boogeyman, I think is the his YouTube handle. He sent a link, which I pinned in the description of that video, on a video of a tour of a bunker site in the Baltic States of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, of a group that was known as the Forest Brothers. These were guerrillas that fought against Soviet occupation. They started fighting in 1944. The last major resistance by them ended in 1956, but small attacks and small groups were still moving around up into the 1980s, continuing to resist the Soviet occupation. I've been trying to figure out a way for a while on what should be done for militia winter camps. We can't do like they did during the Revolution, you know, go off to Valley Forge, hole up until the spring and then start campaigning again. We'll have to keep fighting through the winter. Well, with thermal technology and IRs the way they are nowadays, we can't exactly go out and just set up tents in the woods with stoves on them and stay warm that way between missions like they used to do in the 50s and 60s and possibly into the 70s. We're going to have to dig in. And I figured our best option would be some type of tunnel system, possibly along the lines of what the Viet Cong did. But that takes a lot of time. But this video on the Forest Brothers, it gave me an idea of what they did. They built bunkers out in the forest. And they came up with ways on camouflaging some of the stuff that I thought of, wasn't too sure of, and things like that. Well, apparently it had been done and it was successful. So here's what little I can dig up. I'm sure there was no set design for this, but this is what I got from some of the videos I found on tours of one of the sites. You have the bunker proper. This is side view, this is top view. You have your main entrance coming in. Back here, you have your emergency exit. You'll have an air shaft for bringing air in, and a stove which also works for drawing the air out. Now, the air shaft for coming in is closer to the ground, or it was shorter. Basically, it was a cut in the side of the tree. It was hollowed out inside the stump, and a piece of tiling or pipe was shoved up inside, give it a little bit of support, and the cold air would come in through the side and circulate down inside the bunker. Now, in order to get that flow of air out, you have the stove over here where the smoke will rise up through the stovepipe, which is hidden through a taller tree trunk or stump that looks like it's been broken off up farther up the tree. You have the stovepipe up and running through it. Well, that smoke, as it rises, it draws the air through it up and out. That's actually something that was done at the Battle of the Crater during the American Civil War. If you check into that, where the federal engineers dug a tunnel, and because of the length they had to make sure that there was enough air flowing through, so they built a duct along the floor, and then every so often they would have small fires near that duct. Well, that would cause an updraft, so it would pull the cool air from the outside, the warm air, the stagnant air would get pushed up by the smoke, and it just kept flowing in. This is a similar concept. Now, looking at some of the videos, the walls and the roof, and on some of them the floors, were all timber. They were logs that were cut and stripped or peeled So the bark was removed. And then inside the shelter they would have bunks. They would have, you know, a table or two for eating their food at and stuff. They probably had shelves for food and munitions and that stuff. They hung their weapons from pegs and nails on the wall and so forth. Now, you would have a door that would block off the bunker from the exits. That door should be able to be blocked off if, say, the enemy was this way, or I should say they found the main entrance. This is what's being used as the entrance and exit all the time. This is emergency exit. This is hardly ever used. They find this exit. Well, these guys in here, they know about it. They close that door. They put a couple timbers across the door to block it off. Then they exit out the emergency exit, which hopefully will let out on the side of the hill or something like that into some bushes. The top trap door is open. They toss in a hand grenade. Well, one of the ways you get around that is your sharp bends. So we have, you know, a ladder that comes down into this little area in here. They toss a grenade down. Hopefully it ends up only in here. It goes off. A lot of that force will be dissipated by that corner. So that hopefully by the time it reaches the door, there won't be that much. Now, for us, the overhead cover, you know, look at the video I just did on bunker overhead covers. Try to do at least the protection against 155 millimeter. Give yourself that good layer between the top of the logs and the top of the soil. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately is the thermal signature problem. Well, with the dust proof layer on the overhead cover, maybe you could use Mylar blankets, Mylar survival blankets or space blankets, that very reflective plastic. They're pretty cheap. I usually find them in stores on the clearance because they just don't sell that much. Well, maybe for that layer, you take those, you overlap a bunch of them going across of those thermal blankets, and then you put the cushion layer above that. Because I would think that would block a lot of the thermal signature. It would trap heat inside, and it should prevent the seep through of any heat signature from underneath. That was, I know, a concern with tunnels that were dug underneath the Berlin Wall, is they had to make sure that the tunnels were dug deep because they were worried that the heat from inside that tunnel would melt snow on the ground above, and then you'd have this big melted line right over the top of where the tunnel was, giving it away. Well, having that thermal layer, those Mylar survival blankets, hopefully will cut down on that, and hopefully cut down on the signature. Another note, something that I heard within, say, the past 4 months on Liberty Tree Radio. Someone had called in asking questions about bunkers. One of the things they brought up is when they do bunkers, they construct them in one day. They come in, they erect camo nets, they dig it out, construct the bunker, get it filled back in, and take down the net all within 24 hours. So that satellites and any recon aircraft hopefully don't notice anything. A note that they mentioned was they knew that 20 years ago, back in the 90s, their surveillance technology then, when they came through and they scanned an area, they would notice differences in soil density. So they would mimic the layering of the soil naturally. So let's say we have a top layer that's let's say a foot thick of black soil, and then underneath that is when you get your rocks, sandy layer, your lighter colored soil. Well, they would mimic that as they're filling the soil back in. So when they get, you know, look at the side walls, they'd fill in with that rock and that sandy crap until they're up to the bottom of where the black soil would begin, and then they would start tossing in the black soil. So as they're excavating, they're separating out the different types of soils, and then when they're filling it back in, they're mimicking it, they're trying to copy it. so that any scan done over the area hopefully will not notice differences in density too much. Hopefully it'll just pass over it. One of the things that I was thinking on how to do this with smoke from the stacks, okay, from the stoves. If we use the same way that they did it over and over and over again, it becomes a very common indicator that there's a position there. Well, one thing, if you're doing it on a farm, you know, after you get the bunker constructed over there, bring an old piece of farm machinery over there that's broken down. Break it down right over the top, like right down on the soil above where the stove would be. Take that stovepipe, connect it into maybe the exhaust system on that old tractor, and then it'll escape up through the muffler on the tractor. And then any thermal scans in the area, hopefully they'll just figure that the steel on that tractor for some reason is retaining heat more than the area around it. Another thing would be, if you're out in the woods and that stuff, in the hilly areas and there's lots of rocks, have your stovepipe coming up or a pipe coming up, drill in a lot of holes on the side, and then stack a big pile of rocks around it. Make sure it's nice and loose and stuff. And then as the smoke comes up, it dissipates out through the rocks and spreads out. I wouldn't put holes in the very top of the pipe. Make sure there's a nice cap up there so that water can't come down in. Just make sure you got, you know, basically a pepper pot. There's just holes all over in the sides so that smoke just billows out from the sides and filters out through the rocks. The air inlet inside, I'm guessing we could do something similar. But you want to make sure that you get that flow of air, it's coming in from the side, not straight down. Because a lot of this, you know, if you think about it, if you got an opening going straight down inside, then you got a way that someone can walk right up with a hand grenade and drop it down in there. So that's why you have opening for the air coming in from the side. I came across with researching on VC tunnel systems. They would use anthills. They would have a stovepipe that would come up, and before it would reach the soil, it would branch off. Say 3 or 4 other sections of bamboo were connected into it. Each of those sections went out to separate homemade termite mounds that would dissipate the smoke up and out like mini smokestacks. And that they would have, for their air inlets coming in, they would have ant hills and that stuff with what looks like a decent size hole coming in from the side. Well, they would have, that hole was the entrance for air to be drawn inside. And one of the ways they would cover up human scent, they would put pieces of feces or rotten matter of some type around the entrance hole, so dog teams coming in, they wouldn't notice the human smells and they would just keep moving on. Check into that also. Look up some videos on Viet Cong tunnel systems. But this might be a way that we can have winter shelters in the northern part of the United States for when we're doing combat operations. You know, you're only limited by your own ingenuity. Do research now. Highly recommend, if you got someone who is a diehard member and that stuff, he owns a nice chunk of land back in the woods, you know, put in some of these bunkers and save them for winter time. During the summer, move around, use your shelter halves and that stuff. When late fall's starting to come in, things are starting to freeze, start moving underground into the bunkers. Because it'll be a lot easier for picking up your heat signature in the winter than it will in the summer. So that's why you should probably move underground, so that you'll be able to rest and that stuff underground. You could have multiple bunkers like this connected with cross tunnels, going to other sleep shelters and stuff. You know, spread them out. Have like 6 of them in an area and you have a platoon in each one or whatever. I'm sure you could come up with some good ideas on your own. Hopefully I'm getting you thinking though. Now for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.